sent someone with a higher profile than the ambassador to France. And I think it's fair to say that we should have sent someone with a higher profile to be there.
What was he doing on Sunday? We haven't gotten an accounting of what the president did Sunday.
I haven't spoken to the president about what he did yesterday.
Why couldn't the attorney general? He was in that city, so there's no issue of security was already in place. How could he not attend?
And I'm not aware of the details of the attorney general's schedule for yesterday.
Questions about whether a high-ranking official should have been at that rally in Paris. More than 40 world leaders united for that march. As you take a look at that picture, which has been seen on papers around the world. As noted, the U.S. ambassador to France was the highest-ranking U.S. official there. This has gotten a lot of response. New York Daily News, not usually too critical of the administration, said, "You let the world down." Ted Cruz, who is critical of the administration, Republican senator, saying the absence is symbolic of lack of American leadership on the world stage, and it is dangerous. And Democrat Doug Schoen said in an op-ed, quote, "I've been disappointed by President Obama many times during his 6 years in office, but perhaps never more so than this weekend. He is redefining what it means to be a lame duck, as well as giving the world a master class in what it means to let the world down." With that, let's bring in our panel. Syndicated columnist George Will, Ron Fournier, senior political columnist at National Journal, and John Goldberg, senior editor at National Review. George.
When Fiorello LaGuardia was mayor of New York, he criticized a ruling by a judge, and when it was pointed out to him, you appointed that judge. LaGuardia said, "And I make a mistake, it's a beaut." Apologies are so rare in politics, that one entered the American political lexicon, became very famous. Now, high self-regard is part of the job description of American politics at its senior levels, and White Houses are very reluctant to apologize. It was breathtaking, and good to hear this from the White House, and it makes them more credible. You can believe them now. What's alarming in what Mr. Armstead, however, is that security problems were concerned. The Secret Service didn't have time to get it organized, and they couldn't protect the president while disrupting Paris. There's something really wrong about that.
Well, the Secret Service also said, George, that they were not asked about a trip to Paris.
Well, that's good to hear, because we're constantly told, well, the president must be as safe as possible. No, not at all. President can't be too safe. Of course he can. It's like driving. Shouldn't driving be as safe as possible? No. We'd have cars that could only go 10 miles an hour, and we'd ban left turns. There's risk in life, and presidents have to take some minor risks occasionally to do their jobs.
Ron.
Look, I don't think the president needed to be at this rally. I think we definitely needed somebody of a higher ranking than the ambassador, who's basically a donor to the president. I think you're right, the White House deserves some credit for saying they're sorry, but this is another unforced error by a communication shop, which is probably the worst communication shop in the history of White Houses. They should have seen this PR problem coming. But the fact of the matter is, I don't think the American people have to march the president down Paris Street to show its commitment to France. So I think we're getting a little over our skis in condemning the president himself from him not being there.
But you're saying the vice president, the secretary of state, the attorney general who was in Paris.
At the very least, the attorney general was in Paris, who's obviously very close to the president and is part of the anti-terrorism team, should have stood shoulder to shoulder with the leaders. The vice president could have gone there. If I was advising the White House, I would not have would have said, don't send the president.
Jonah, this is an issue for this White House, whether you call it optics, which is a word I really hate, but optics or understanding of tone deaf. Take a listen to the president in Texas as that Central American immigrant story was evolving. Then after the James Foley execution and him playing golf, and then Secretary of State.
This isn't theater. This is a problem. I'm not interested in photo ops. I'm interested in solving a problem. Part of this job is also the theater of it. Part of it is, how are you? How are you? Well, it's not something that that always comes naturally to me, but it matters, and I'm mindful of that.
I really think this is sort of dribbling a little bit.
So it's evolution.
Yeah, I mean, look, first of all, the guy with the Greek columns, the guy who campaigned in Berlin, that somehow he doesn't like the theater of politics strikes me as a little ridiculous. I think what happened, but the pattern here is that whenever they blow it, with their communication shop, the pattern is that they say, well, we're just too good for the optics. But other times they're perfectly happy to exploit optics and do theater. It's just that sometimes they're bad at it, and they say that they meant, it's like when you trip and you say, I meant to do that. The other thing is, look, I think everyone agrees that this was a mistake. The question is, why was it a mistake? Part of it is incompetence. I think, you can never rule out incompetence as an explanation for anything in Washington. But part of it also is that it fits into a pattern that this president and this White House has an ideological rule that has gone forth that says we are never going to overreact to terrorism. We're never going to make a big deal about the war on terror if we don't absolutely have to. We always say it's an isolated incident until it's way too late. We call it workplace violence when it was a terrorist attack, time and time again. And I think that ideological climate was one of the things that probably contributed to the reasons why they misread this moment so terribly.
I mean, you have the French president, Hollande, saying they're at a war with radical Islam, George. This White House is reticent to get to that point. And in fact, the Attorney General had a hard time answering questions about it this week.
Yes, they have not got to that point. But again, this is not to be separated from the question of the theater of politics. Great actors of the 20th century, Laurence Olivier, Richard Burton, Winston Churchill, Franklin Roosevelt, and Charles de Gaulle. This is part of moving a nation. And so it's related to the language you use about Islam and where you go and how you behave.
Let me just ask you about this. Now they're going to have this summit. It's a summit on violent extremism. That's the title overall. Mm-hmm. Now it's scheduled for sometime next month.
Rights delayed.
I mean, what?
I agree with everything both of you said, and the only reason this summit is now on is because of the controversy around this poor optics. Look, I agree that the president has not been very good about understanding the power, the symbolism of his office. In this case, the reason I came down personally and saying I would not send the president was, well, we're obviously, the substance what we're worried about here is a copycat attack, lone wolf attack. Especially coming on the heels of what happened in France, that we could have something happening imminently. Well, what I was thinking personally is, what if we got attacked while the president was overseas? Which is very likely. My first reaction would be, what is he doing overseas? Why isn't he watching the home front here? What would the optics be like had we been hit while he was marching the streets of Paris? So that's where I came down, where I came with the president.
That's why God gave us vice presidents, right?
So certainly, send the vice president, send Holder, have somebody else there. I just don't think the president should have been there, in my personal view. But I agree with everything else you said.
Does this umbrella affect people's confidence in how they're going to fight terrorism or their ability to defend us against this kind of terrorism?
Well, look, I think at this point, 6 years in, it's pretty clear that Barack Obama doesn't like buying into the logic of the war on terror. I mean, we've recounted this many times on this panel, where he is rhetorically, politically, ideologically very reluctant to lend credence to the idea that this is anything more than a surgical, targeted police action, in effect, a law enforcement issue, not a clash of civilizations, which I think is a fair thing to resist, but also not anything approaching a real war.